hope you had the opportunity to enjoy lunch, get outside and enjoy some fresh air, enjoy some engaging conversation. I know I was sitting outside looking at the landscape in a completely different way, thinking both about the geology under my feet and thinking about what was going on in the 1930s in Vermont and 40s as Mrs. Webb was founding the museum. So it got me thinking in a lot of different ways, and I know that we'll continue to have our minds stretched this afternoon as we hear from 4 of the very talented artists who are featured in Eyes on the Land, the exhibition here at Shelburne Museum. And we will conclude our afternoon with exploring the art of conservation. I did just want to quickly thank our colleagues from RETN who are here filming today. You'll be able to see the proceedings of this day of conversation later on in the month. And I realize also that I have not introduced myself, although I know many of you. I'm Karen Peterson. I'm the Director of Education here at Shelburne Museum. So along with Tom, again, thank you for your participation, for your really interesting questions, and for coming along on this exploration of Vermont with us. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to briefly introduce each of the artists together. I'm going to give you biographical sketches of each of them. They will come up one at a time and give their presentations, and at the end of those presentations, we'll be inviting them up to a panel presentation, so you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of them at that time. The first artist is Susan Abbott, whose oil and watercolor paintings examine the specifics and mood of place, especially the New England working landscape, within a strong framework of color and design. Susan graduated with a BFA and MFA in painting from the Maryland Institute College of Art. She has worked as a professional artist since that time, exhibiting in galleries and museums around the country. Abbott is also well known as a teacher of painting workshops in the United States and abroad. Our second speaker, artist, educator, and renaturalist Brian Collier's interdisciplinary projects manifest as a combination of sanctioned and unsanctioned public projects, exhibitions, and multimedia presentations. Unsanctioned. He has exhibited widely in the United States and abroad. Collier's work has been written about in numerous publications and books. Collier is an assistant professor of art at St. Michael's College and lives in Heinsberg, Vermont. Our third speaker, Cameron Davis, is a senior lecturer with the University of Vermont Department of Art and Art History. She teaches painting, drawing, perspectives on making, and transdisciplinary courses in art, ecology, and community. She considers her paintings and community art projects to be her primary vehicle for exploring issues of conscious perception and living sustainably in a warming world. And our final speaker, Gary Savour, is a visual artist who creates both environmental sculpture and works on paper. Born and educated in Manchester, England, she studied also in Leeds and moved to the United States in 2007. Savour has exhibited in the United States, the UK, and internationally. She also works on bringing art to the community and believes passionately in the power of participatory community art events, as was noted by the fact that she spent part of her morning this morning engaging with our public out in the lobby, map making. So, without further ado, let me bring Susan Abbott to the podium.
Greetings. Does that sound okay? I want to just kind of walk you through my Eyes on the Land project. And I created an ebook as part of my project, so I'm going to be sharing some of the pages of that with you while I talk about, thank you. Is that better? Talk about kind of the process I went through to create the 35 paintings that I have in the Eyes on the Land exhibit. I selected the Johnson Farm. There was actually one of the properties was directly across my road in Marshfield, the Marshfield Town Forest, but I decided I wanted a project that was 2 hours north of my studio. And because mainly I wanted to get to know that part of the state better. And the property sounded intriguing. It's up on the Canadian-New Hampshire border, borders the Connecticut River. It's about 800 acres. It's an unusual property because about a third of it is natural area wetlands, and the rest is a dairy farm with tilled land to support the dairy farm. And when the property went into conservation, the farmer was very determined that the wetlands be protected, which the Land Trust and the Nature Conservancy were only too happy to help with. So when I first went up to this property, I was pretty much overwhelmed by 800 acres stretching along a river, and I started out by mapping it myself, doing a lot of drawing as a way to understand, and also creating my own sites that I would go back to paint. I thought about, what am I really interested in here? And came to the conclusion that what really grabbed me was how the wetlands and the tilled lands, the man-made working landscape versus the natural landscape, how they intersected and interacted. And I decided that I was going to really base my project on looking at those borders. This was a stretch for me because in most of my painting I deal much more with the built landscape, what we call the working landscape. I'm very interested in, especially in New England, kind of structures and how they ended up kind of springing out of the natural landscape here. So with this project, I was really only working with a very unstructured landscape that just the geometry of those fields gave a kind of line to that I could hold on to. And I decided that what I wanted to do was basically create studies, just spend a lot of time on the land. And one of the unusual things about Eyes on the Land is that artists were given an entire year, which is unusual for a show, to really get to know their properties. And I wanted to work through those 4 seasons. So when I first went up, my first job was to get my dogs out of my car because they always want to go, and a lab and wetlands don't mix too well. So occasionally they did accompany me, but not always. So when you're painting, which is what I do, you can have all kinds of theories and ideas about what you're doing, but what it really comes down to is you standing at your easel creating a painting. So as I say, the next 4 hours just basically me skirmishing with my easel, trying to come up with that first painting in a year-long project. And right from the beginning, I was seeing that kind of patterning that I was interested in, and also that kind of richness in the natural areas that had a sort of a contrast to the simplicity of the man-made areas. I kept going up through the year. You can see this is 2014, so this was an entire year I had to work here, and was often, just standing alone down a farm track for a couple hours for each painting, and found again that those intersections, the difference, the kind of compositions that I was getting, because as a painter, what I'm interested in, my vocabulary is color and shape. I was finding a wealth of material to dig into there. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a historian. I wish I knew plants, I really don't. It's certainly on my bucket list to become more familiar with botany than I am right now, but I did find that just by careful observation, the kind that I do, which is just a kind of careful looking, I did start to really know that land and understand things like where a marsh was transitioning into a mowed part of the property, just through color shifts. And color shifts became a really important part of my project. Seeing how green, we talk about Vermont as the Green Mountain State. Well, when you're really looking at the landscape, you see that we really are moving out of green a lot when we're looking at landscape, especially with these wetlands. You can see the mowed land here is that really bright green, but as soon as you get into the wetland, you start to get really all the way around the color wheel. Fall was an opportunity, certainly, to look at not just the product. We've talked about process and product. Oftentimes we're looking at the product of the seasons when we just go out and do leaf peeping. But when you're looking at a landscape over a lot of time, you start to see process. You start to see color really just shifting in very subtle, incremental ways from one season to the next. And of course, autumn was a time that I was looking forward to, just with the the kind of vibrancy of color, but also because for the first time I was able to get close to wetlands, which if you look at my paintings in the show, you'll see sometimes the wetlands are just a little sliver of white paint in the distance, and then through another part of the year they start to dominate the compositions. So these wetlands are a special place. They were set aside to protect them because they're fragile zones. And I do wish I could understand them better, but what I did find is that I could have a sensory kind of entry into these really special ecological zones. As I say here, I could hear geese and ducks call overhead, see an egret rise from a riverbank, smell the wet reeds, feel the bite of a mosquito and the balm of a warm breeze. So what I found was that I was able, through sensory information, to build an understanding with a specific place. And I also say here, creative work, making something out of nothing, all by yourself, may seem like relaxing fun to folks who've never tried it. Really what we're engaged with when we're working with sort of the definition of creativity is not knowing where you're headed. So you have to have faith that all this uncertainty is going to result in a project, especially when you know there's a museum show a year on the other end of it. And I think that's something all the artists shared, was starting out really not even knowing what the questions we were asking sometimes were. So that's the faith that somehow when you start that painting or whatever your project is, you're going to come out with something you can communicate, both to yourself and to other people that view your work. I thought a lot about what exactly am I doing here, standing out in this field by myself for 4 hours at a time doing a painting. What do I bring to this that a farmer, a biologist, a writer, a historian, a geologist, they all have a special relationship with this land. What exactly does somebody who's working almost entirely subjectively have to bring to that role? And what I concluded was that I think that's what artists add. We talk about value added, like milk becomes cheese, and that adds value. I think what artists do is they add value sometimes to what we're observing so carefully. That is really one of our abilities, is to pay very, very careful attention when nobody else really feels like it makes any sense to be standing out in that field for that long. And if you think about Winslow Homer adding value to the main landscape, or you think about Monet or the Impressionist painters, how they changed the way we see rural landscape in general, not even just the French landscape. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. In winter, I couldn't paint outside. I wanted all my paintings to be direct observation rather than from photographs, but I could go out and just take a look and drag my poor dogs along to go out under 5 degrees and take a look at this land. And what I saw again was this complete transformation under snow, how all that color, I'd been working really all the way around the color wheel for the rest of the year, and suddenly I was, you're looking at white, brown, blue. Just, I think the way our landscape is totally transformed 5 times a year is a real gift of living here. I saw again, I was reminded of how the geometry between the man-made working landscape and the natural landscape is completely different. That kind of punctuation of the corn versus these undulating folds of the wetland area. That was really brought home to me by seeing it under snow. I thought of my favorite time up there was actually mud season. I thought of it as the wind in the willow season, just because you saw that land coming back, it's sort of what Thor was talking about, with how in the big geological time the land sort of reemerged from ice and water. And you could really see that up at the Johnson farm, how there was a huge pond that I was painting that was going to be completely gone in a month. And it was a real pleasure to, again, look at that color shift and really push into blues, ochres. I also enjoyed getting to know this part of the state. I don't know how many of you have been up to the really far northeast kingdom, but it's a really different part of the country. And got to know Colebrook, New Hampshire. I don't know if any of you have been there, but that's a town that was really built on the working landscape on the Connecticut River. And I found that you could actually get a very decent latte up there. And I found a very charming motel that I could stay in Colebrook for longer painting periods. Again, in the spring, the land shifted in color. It tilted towards lemon yellow, violet, purple. I was in a whole new place on my palette. red, blues, really unexpected colors. And even prompted me to do a kind of color grid when I got back to my studio, just thinking about the incredibly wide range that I was seeing in what looked like a really restricted time of year for color. This summer, I had a big surprise, which was I found there were, about 100 acres I didn't really realize were part of the property that I could then spend the summer painting on. And they were a really spectacular acreage because there were a rare kind of a forest, a silver maple, ostrich fern, river forest. So getting in there to paint was really a pleasure. Seeing the flowers, the wildflowers come was a pleasure. And exploring the land from the river for the first time, getting out of my kayak and seeing these fields that I'd become so familiar with from a whole nother vantage point. As I finished up my project, I gave a lot of thought exactly to what had I gotten out of this year that I had spent on and off in this new place, out on my own painting. And firstly, it was personal. It was really discovering that I liked being out in the middle of nowhere by myself. I had been a little worried what it would be like to be down a farm track, other than the time I came back and found that my battery had died. I didn't have anything that made me the least bit nervous. So that was a gift that I got from this, was discovering that to be in a natural place and just blend in with the environment was a huge gift to me. The main takeaway for me was my change in an increased understanding of wetlands. I have farmers in my family, and I hear them talk about draining their fields, and wetlands they're a nuisance when you farm. What I came to see was these were incredibly rich places that I really could experience from a sensory viewpoint. What really brought this home to me, I have to say that I started to feel much more Thoreau's bias towards natural land and away from agricultural land by standing, say, in a cornfield and painting and looking down at a square yard. And because the farmer was a good farmer, it was soil and corn. That's all there was. When I stood on the verge of a wetland and I looked down, that yard was just a rich area of a multitude of plants, of animals. It really made me think about the loss, what we were losing when we lose our wetlands, and thankful for organizations that protect those areas for us, for all of us. I also learned that I'm tough about painting around mosquitoes. I learned how to armor myself so I could get out there and paint no matter what those mosquitoes were doing. And I think one of the main things was I learned that I could develop a relationship with a place by looking, by being a patient observer, by standing and listening and feeling. And I think sometimes we tend to look at place for its utility in the sense, what can this do for me? How can this landscape work for me? And I think a better question might be, where can I meet this landscape in the middle, this place in the middle, and not always have to approach it through facts and figures and planning, but to develop a relationship because it's in our best interest to have that relationship with our land. We need it. And lastly, I just learned that I love this part of the state. I'm looking forward to starting another series up along the Connecticut River. So thanks very much.